There is a deep paradox at the heart of Tibetan Buddhism, a subtle and often misunderstood truth that challenges every idea we hold about enlightenment and spiritual attainment. Most people who begin a spiritual journey set their eyes firmly on a goal they call nirvana, liberation, awakening, enlightenment. They imagine it as a distant land of eternal peace, a glorious destination to arrive at after years of purifying karma, transcending suffering, and perfecting themselves through meditation and virtue. In the Western imagination especially, nirvana becomes almost like a spiritual version of retirement, a place where you finally get to rest after a lifetime of struggle. But the more carefully and deeply you listen to the true teachings of the Tibetan masters, the more you begin to hear a startling warning whispered steadily through the centuries, repeated in text after text, transmitted from teacher to student in unbroken lineages. The moment you start actively seeking nirvana as an object to be attained, you have already lost it. The very idea that liberation is something external to be gained, something you don't currently possess that must be acquired through effort, is itself the fundamental source of bondage. The one who desires freedom is the prisoner. The act of spiritual striving itself becomes the wall that hides the infinite sky of your true nature. In Tibetan Buddhism, this counterintuitive insight is repeated like a sacred mantra that the conceptual intellect rarely wants to hear or accept. Stop trying to escape from where you are. Stop chasing enlightenment as if it were somewhere else, some other state, some elevated condition separate from this very moment. Samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, delusion and suffering, and nirvana, the peace and freedom that transcends all conditioned existence, are not two different places or states. They are the exact same reality experienced radically differently depending solely on your depth of recognition and understanding. When you grasp at phenomena and resist what arises, when you cling to pleasure and push away pain, when you solidify self and other, you experience samsara in all its painful intensity. When you completely stop grasping, when you cease resisting the flow of experience, when you recognize the true, empty, luminous nature of what is arising moment by moment, you realize nirvana right here. Nothing whatsoever changes in the external world. The difference is entirely and exclusively in the quality of perception, in the presence or absence of delusion. You can spend an entire lifetime or countless lifetimes trying desperately to leave one world for another, but the escape attempt itself, the very project of getting from here to there, is just another, perhaps subtler form of attachment and aversion. The Buddha never promised anyone that they would find lasting happiness by running away from life, by rejecting existence, by transcending the world. He taught instead a radical method for how to see life without distortion, how to perceive reality exactly as it is. In most religious and spiritual traditions across cultures, freedom means reaching another realm entirely, ascending beyond this world of suffering into a perfect state of eternal calm, bliss, or union with the divine. But the Tibetan masters, inheriting and refining the Mahayana insight, overturned that entire pursuit completely and radically. They call this profound reversal the very heart of the Mahayana teaching. The ultimate truth of nirvana is not that you go somewhere else, leave this existence behind, or transform into something fundamentally different. Rather, it is that you finally recognize and rest in the place you have actually never left for even a single instant. Samsara is simply nirvana, seen through the distorting lens of ignorance, grasping, and conceptual overlay. Nirvana is simply samsara seen clearly, nakedly, without the interference of hope and fear. The attempt to divide them into separate categories, the effort to reach the one while desperately trying to escape the other, is precisely what keeps them appearing as separate and maintains the illusion of bondage. Patrul Rinpoche, one of the most beloved and authentically realized wandering yogis of 19th century Tibet, a master who lived simply and taught with disarming directness, said with perfect clarity that as long as even the subtle thought exists in your mind, I must be free, I must attain liberation, the chain of samsara remains completely unbroken and intact. The more intensely you chase after freedom, the more desperately you grasp for enlightenment, the more tightly you tie the knot of self-concern. Seeking nirvana as a future attainment is like a wave frantically trying to find the ocean, swimming through water, searching for water. Every movement it makes with the intention to reach the ocean, every effort to get there, actually pulls it further and further from the simple recognition that it already is, has always been, and can never be anything other than the ocean itself. The struggle itself becomes the veil that obscures. The search manufactures and maintains the sense of distance. Enlightenment recedes like the horizon the very moment you try to grasp it and make it yours. The profound Mahayana Sutras, especially the Prajnaparamita literature, describe this fundamental paradox with striking and uncompromising clarity. They boldly state that there is not the slightest difference between nirvana and samsara, not even the width of a single hair, not even the smallest conceptual distinction. None of the countless Buddhas throughout space and time attained nirvana by violently rejecting the world, by condemning existence, or by trying to destroy phenomena. They awakened precisely by recognizing the world's true nature as it is, empty yet luminous, ungraspable yet vividly apparent. Ordinary confused beings suffer endlessly because they pursue and cling to what they imagine to be real, solid, and permanent. Buddhas are completely free because they have stopped imagining, stopped conceptually fabricating, stopped imposing mental constructs onto naked reality. When you truly understand this crucial difference at the deepest level, the compulsive seeking dissolves completely, like a mirage evaporating under the direct light of the midday sun. The danger of seeking nirvana is not merely philosophical or theoretical. It hides insidiously in our spiritual emotions and motivations, in very subtle, almost undetectable ways. The desire for awakening skillfully disguises itself as pure devotion, as spiritual discipline, as virtuous diligence. You meditate faithfully every day, study the profound scriptures with great concentration, accumulate merit through generous offerings, all sustained by the secret unspoken hope buried deep in your heart that one day, perhaps in this life or perhaps in a future one, you will finally cross some ultimate threshold and become permanently enlightened. That hope itself, innocent and spiritual as it seems, is actually samsara in its most refined form. The mind that constantly projects liberation into an imagined future inevitably creates and reinforces the illusion of time, distance, and a separate self who lacks something essential. The real nirvana, the actual liberation, is utterly timeless, always already present. The very instant you make it into something that will happen tomorrow or next year or next lifetime, it has completely vanished from direct experience. The teachers call this seductive trap the golden chain, the most refined, respectable, and difficult to detect form of bondage. You have simply replaced your craving for worldly pleasure, status, and comfort with a seemingly nobler craving for peace, wisdom, and spiritual attainment. But the fundamental mechanism of craving and grasping remains utterly intact and operational. You are still fundamentally caught in the cycle of desire and dissatisfaction, only now you wear beautiful spiritual robes and use elevated Dharma language to describe your imprisonment. The ego, that survival mechanism of self-identification and self-concern, is remarkably cunning and adaptive. Once it clearly realizes through experience that chasing after wealth, sensual pleasure, fame, and worldly power inevitably yields only more suffering and dissatisfaction, it doesn't surrender or dissolve. Instead, it simply shifts strategy and begins chasing holiness, spiritual accomplishment, and enlightenment instead. The ego desperately wants to become a spiritually accomplished person, someone special and superior, complete with extraordinary meditation experiences, supernatural powers, and profound realizations it can claim as its own. If you have ever felt even a subtle sense of pride about the quality of your meditation, if you felt superior to others because of your spiritual practice, if you've become attached to pleasant states of calm or bliss, if you've secretly hoped others would recognize your advancement, you have directly tasted this exquisite trap. A Tibetan master was once asked by a sincere student what was the absolute hardest and most persistent delusion to completely transcend, and he replied without hesitation, the pride of having no pride, the subtle arrogance of thinking you are truly humble and awakened. Even the thought, however quiet and unspoken, that you are genuinely humble, that you have transcended ego, that you are now an awakened being, instantly becomes just another sophisticated mask for self-grasping, another layer of identification. True liberation cannot be added to the ego structure like another achievement or quality. It begins only in the moment when the entire exhausting project of being someone, of becoming something, completely collapses under its own weight. In the highest and most direct teachings of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, this truth is taken to its absolute ultimate expression without compromise or consolation. They teach with radical clarity that the so-called mind of delusion and the so-called mind of enlightenment are not two different minds at all. They are precisely the same single awareness, the same luminous cognizance. When that awareness is confused, not recognizing its own nature, it appears and functions as samsara, spinning endlessly in patterns of suffering. That exact same awareness, when it nakedly recognizes itself without conceptual interference, appears and functions as nirvana, resting in natural freedom. There is no second mind hiding behind or waiting beneath your current awareness. There is no higher consciousness you need to access or develop. Recognition alone, simple direct seeing, instantly transforms appearance without changing anything substantial. This is precisely why the great philosopher and master Nagarjuna systematically dismantled and demolished the naive idea of an attainable nirvana through his rigorous middle-way logic. He demonstrated conclusively that if liberation were truly a thing produced by the causes and conditions of practice, some kind of result manufactured through effort, then it would also inevitably decay and disappear when those supporting conditions changed or ceased. Anything and everything you can obtain through effort can eventually be lost. Therefore, true ultimate freedom is categorically not the result of cause and effect, not something produced, but rather the spontaneous cessation of dualistic fabrication altogether, the natural state revealed when conceptual construction stops. The persistent warning against seeking nirvana as an object arises directly from the compassion of realized masters who have seen clearly. They watched generation after generation, century after century, of sincere and devoted practitioners exhaust themselves completely, waste precious human lives, chasing after spiritual comfort, attainment, and certainty. Even the Buddha's own spiritual path originally began with an intense personal desire for his own liberation from suffering, but it matured through his 6 years of extreme ascetic practice into the profound wisdom of letting go of absolutely every form of grasping, even and especially grasping for holiness and enlightenment itself. After his complete enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he said, describing what he had realized, profound peace, utterly beyond all dualistic concepts of gain and loss, beyond attainment and non-attainment, that is the true nirvana. He did not characterize it as an escape from reality or a transcendence of existence. He called it simply awakening to suchness, to things exactly as they are. In Sanskrit, the term tatha or tathata means precisely thus, exactly so, just this. Nirvana, in its deepest sense, simply means seeing and resting in things thus, without any overlay of conceptual distortion, hope, or fear. When you try to find nirvana through striving and effort, through spiritual willpower and determination, you are exactly like someone who stirs up clear, still water in order to see its bottom more clearly. The very effort only clouds the water and obscures what you're trying to see. When you completely stop interfering, stop manipulating, stop trying to make something happen, clarity appears naturally and spontaneously without any need for manufacture. This is precisely why the highest view in Dzogchen is sometimes called the effortless path, the natural way, the non-doing that accomplishes everything. You must practice earnestly, sincerely, and diligently until the practice itself dissolves and reveals its own groundlessness. You meditate with clear intention and focused discipline until awareness reveals itself as utterly unmanufactured, not created by your meditation. When this recognition finally dawns, you realize with shocking clarity that you are never actually moving toward something distant. You are simply gradually removing layer after layer of the conceptual veil that imagined and maintained the illusion of distance and separation. Still, completely abandoning the idea of spiritual goal and attainment does not mean falling into nihilistic apathy, laziness, or spiritual bypass. Without genuine compassion and rigorous ethical discipline, the insight into emptiness and non-seeking remains merely intellectual. a clever philosophical position without transformative power. Tibetan Buddhism skillfully preserves the crucial balance between relative and ultimate truths. It trains beginners systematically to cultivate clear intention, ethical virtue, concentration, and mindfulness, while simultaneously and constantly reminding them that the ultimate purpose of the entire path is to recognize directly that there never was a truly separate, substantial traveler walking anywhere. The map completely disappears, becomes unnecessary, the moment you fully understand and recognize where you actually stand. This is called the pathless path, the journey without distance. You walk it sincerely with full commitment until the very walking dissolves completely into simply being, into natural presence without effort. The great Bodhisattva Shantideva spoke about this profound paradox beautifully in his masterwork On the Way of the Bodhisattva. He warned with vivid imagery that those who desperately wish to abandon and escape from samsara, while simultaneously rejecting and hating it, are exactly like men who frantically try to escape from their own shadow by running away from it. The very effort of running creates and maintains the appearance of the shadow as something separate to escape. If you can accept samsara completely and fully, not with resignation or defeat but with clear seeing of its fundamentally empty nature, liberation blooms spontaneously like a flower opening to sunlight. You cannot throw away or destroy what was never actually solid, substantial, or inherently existent to begin with. That radical acceptance is not passive resignation to suffering or apathetic tolerance of confusion. It is direct seeing, immediate recognition of the nature of experience itself. The Tibetan masters go even further into this insight by teaching that nirvana, pursued selfishly and personally, for one's own benefit alone, actually becomes spiritual poison rather than medicine. This is because true complete awakening is utterly inseparable from boundless compassion for all beings. In the profound bodhisattva ideal and vow, no one enters final nirvana alone while others remain suffering. The commitment is to remain willingly within the endless cycles of existence, taking rebirth again and again, until absolutely every single sentient being without exception is completely free from suffering. In that vast compassionate commitment, paradoxically and mysteriously, the bodhisattva discovers the truest and most complete liberation, precisely because he or she no longer wants nirvana selfishly, for themselves alone. Compassion completely breaks and dissolves the last subtle trace of self-reference and self-concern. The ordinary limited seeker yearns anxiously for his own personal peace and security. The bodhisattva's heart has become so infinitely vast and all-encompassing that the conceptual distinction between his own peace and liberation and others' suffering and bondage completely dissolves into space. The Heart Sutra, recited melodiously by Tibetan monastics every single day as a core liturgy, compresses this entire profound insight into one thunderbolt sentence that shatters conceptual mind. There is no path, no attainment, and nothing whatsoever to attain. The beginning student or novice practitioner naturally wonders in confusion why a religion apparently built entirely on renunciation, ethics, meditation, and spiritual development would proclaim so boldly that there is ultimately no attainment. But the logic, when seen clearly, is both merciful and mathematically exact. The very concept and structure of attainment inherently requires three elements: a seeker who lacks something, a distance that must be traversed, and a goal situated in future time. Ultimate reality, the nature of mind itself, contains absolutely none of these three fabricated elements. Therefore, to the mind that desperately clings to the project of achieving and becoming, the sutra sounds like pure negation, nihilism, or defeat. But to the mind that has learned to let go, to release and relax, it rings out as the liberating sound of perfect freedom, the end of seeking. You can, of course, sit down in meditation posture, and after some time feel immense peace, tranquility, stillness, even bliss, flooding through body and mind. There is nothing wrong with these experiences in themselves. The danger, the trap that captures many practitioners, is to mistake that temporary peace for actual nirvana, to grasp at it as the goal. Peace, when grasped at and clung to as mine, as something to protect and maintain, inevitably becomes a prison rather than freedom. Stillness without the wisdom of recognizing emptiness very easily hardens into complacency, spiritual materialism, or what the masters call the demon of tranquility. It seductively tempts you to rest in dull contentment and pleasant feelings, completely forgetting to see through to the empty, groundless nature of the very one who feels content and peaceful. Real nirvana, actual liberation, fully includes disturbance, noise, chaos, difficult feelings, and turbulent thoughts. It is not the absence of experience but the direct recognition that all phenomena whatsoever, pleasant and unpleasant, wanted and unwanted, peaceful and disturbing, shine equally as the same luminous empty display of awareness itself, none more real or solid than any other. The great yogi Milarepa, Tibet's most beloved enlightened poet and singer, sang about this teaching when his disciples complained bitterly about the fierce storms that constantly lashed his exposed mountain cave. He told them with a laugh that thunder, howling wind, and torrential rain were among his greatest and most direct teachers. The overwhelming sound of the gale roaring through the peaks resounded like the most profound mantra, directly demonstrating the radical impermanence and groundlessness of all formations and constructions. He sang, "I do not sing songs and practice here in order to escape from the storm or find shelter from the elements, but rather to see directly and recognize the sound's own empty nature, to hear the thunder as Dharmakaya itself. That is authentic nirvana, finding peace within motion rather than apart from it, recognizing space within form rather than seeking formless space elsewhere." In practical everyday life, how exactly do you embody and live a non-seeking path without falling into the opposite extreme of passivity, laziness, or nihilistic indifference? The answer begins not with what you do externally, but before every action arises, by clearly seeing and recognizing your motivation. When you sit down to meditate, turn attention inward and look directly, nakedly, into the very impulse to meditate. What is driving you? When you pray or make offerings or study texts, feel carefully into the subtle desires hiding beneath the outwardly virtuous words and actions. Is there hope for a specific result? A secret expectation of progress? Is there fear of spiritual failure or inadequacy? Is there pride in being a good spiritual practitioner? Don't judge these motivations as bad or try to suppress them. Just see them clearly. Recognize them as what they are. Movements of mind. The seeing itself, the clear recognition, is completely sufficient. If you fight against the desire, or try to forcefully eliminate it, it only strengthens and goes underground. But if you simply let it be seen clearly in the light of awareness, it dissolves naturally like mist in sunlight, without leaving a trace. Eventually, through this practice of seeing, your entire spiritual practice becomes self-liberating rather than self-concerned. You sit in meditation not to get somewhere or become someone, but simply because sitting and being are no longer experienced as two separate activities. Gradually, organically, without force, ordinary daily life becomes completely indistinguishable from formal spiritual practice. Eating your breakfast, working at your job, walking down the street, listening to traffic sounds, all reveal themselves as equally clear displays of luminous mind, none more sacred or spiritual than any other. There is literally nothing mundane left to escape from. No profane world opposing a sacred one. The artificial distinction between what's considered sacred and what's dismissed as worldly completely collapses into the recognition of a single taste. You begin to notice through direct experience that emotions self-liberate spontaneously when simply recognized without grasping or aversion. Anger flashes into existence like lightning and dissolves back into space in its own light, leaving no residue. Joy arises like a wave and naturally subsides. Fear dances. Samsara itself becomes your teacher, instructing you continuously through every perception, each moment becoming yet another wide-open gate into timeless awareness. Tibetan masters across all lineages often describe this way of living as recognizing and abiding in the truth, that whatever arises in experience is already perfect, complete, lacking nothing. They frequently use the ancient metaphor of sky and clouds to point to this. The sky represents awareness itself, vast, open, and utterly unsullied by anything that appears within it. Clouds represent thoughts, emotions, sensations, experiences of all kinds. They come and they go, they gather and they disperse, but the sky itself never moves, never changes, is never stained or improved by any cloud. The naive beginning practitioner exhausts himself, trying to chase away all clouds in order to reveal the pure sky, not understanding that this effort itself is just another cloud. The wise, mature practitioner knows and rests in the recognition that the clouds themselves are nothing other than sky, empty display. He simply lets them appear and dissolve without any interference whatsoever, without trying to maintain good experiences or eliminate bad ones. That natural allowing, that effortless non-manipulation, is what non-seeking truly means in lived experience. When death inevitably comes, this profound teaching becomes the ultimate final test of your understanding. Most people, even long-time practitioners, grasp desperately for an escape route in the face of death, some comforting promise of paradise, heaven, or a pure realm. The Bardo Thodol, the liberation through hearing in the intermediate state, warns explicitly and repeatedly that such grasping, hoping, and striving at the critical moment of death gives rise to overwhelming fear, confusion, and karmic propulsion into rebirth. The texts describe how luminous visions spontaneously appear in the bardos after death. Deities both peaceful and wrathful, brilliant lights, overwhelming sounds, and the instruction transmitted from master to disciple says clearly and simply, if you can recognize these appearances as nothing other than your own mind's display, as empty projections with no external substantial reality, liberation is absolutely instantaneous, occurring in that very moment of recognition. But if instead you chase after the peaceful, beautiful forms out of attraction or flee in terror from the wrathful, frightening ones out of aversion, the entire mechanism of karmic rebirth begins turning again. Everything depends on recognition rather than acquisition, on seeing rather than getting. In everyday life, the process and principle are identical. Each difficulty that arises, each heartbreak, each strong desire or aversion, is actually a small bardo, an intermediate state pregnant with the possibility of liberation or continued confusion. When you habitually chase solutions, frantically try to fix problems, or desperately avoid uncomfortable feelings, the bardo moment closes and rebirth into the same patterns continues automatically. But when you pause and recognize the entire play as mind's own empty, luminous display, liberation opens right there in that very instant. Seeking nirvana after death becomes completely unnecessary when you have learned through repeated practice to recognize it during breakfast, during traffic jams, during difficult conversations, during moments of beauty and moments of pain. Every single instant, without exception, offers precisely the same opportunity for liberation. The compassion embedded in this insight is truly immense and all-encompassing. It does not condemn humanity for craving peace and happiness. It understands completely and intimately why beings suffer as they do. But it gently, persistently undermines the perpetual hope for elsewhere, the constant fantasy of a better situation. It teaches instead that suffering ends not through changing external circumstances, but through the complete cessation of resistance to what is. The wise do not run from life. They remain, staying fully present in the midst of constant change. They smile not because everything is perfect, but because they have stopped searching for permanence in a world where everything is impermanent. Resting nakedly inside impermanence itself, they touch directly the unchanging awareness that was never born and will never die. His Holiness the Dalai Lama once explained gently to a confused Western student who had asked desperately about when and how to attain enlightenment, "Don't hurry, don't rush. Enlightenment is already present inside your ordinary body with all its limitations, your confused emotions with all their turbulence, your tired mind with all its thoughts. If you keep looking elsewhere for it, searching outside, you will miss it completely." This is the same fundamental wisdom echoed throughout Dzogchen teachings as recognizing Rigpa, primordial awareness within and as the very display of samsaric appearances. Enlightenment is definitively not the absence or elimination of delusion, confusion, and afflictive emotion. It is the direct recognition of their true empty nature. The moment you truly see this, delusion and enlightenment are no longer experienced as different substances or opposing states. They are simply two different names, two different concepts, for the same seamless play of awareness appearing as experience. This vision and recognition naturally, inevitably generates infinite compassion without any need for deliberate cultivation or manufacture. When you completely stop chasing after your own personal salvation, when the project of self-improvement finally exhausts itself, you begin to perceive other beings not as truly separate entities lost hopelessly in ignorance, but as temporary masks, fleeting expressions of that same singular awareness, dancing playfully in infinite different patterns and forms. From this profound insight, helping others is no longer experienced as duty, obligation, or even choice. It becomes spontaneous expression, natural activity, like the sun radiating warmth. The awakened mind of enlightenment manifests effortlessly as kindness, generosity, patience, joy. That selfless kindness transforms the entire atmosphere around you, affecting others in ways you may never see or know. Samsara, completely freed from the poison of grasping and self-concern, reveals itself as the vast field of the Bodhisattva's joyful liberating activity. Serving beings becomes nothing other than conscious participation in the boundless play of Nirvana itself, expressing through form. Why then does Tibetan Buddhism warn so persistently and insistently against seeking Nirvana? Because seeking, by its very structure, assumes and creates distance. And distance, that imagined gap between here and there, keeps you turning endlessly in circles, chasing your tail like a confused dog. The universe, reality itself, is absolutely not withholding enlightenment from you as some kind of test or punishment. It is your own compulsive wanting, your grasping mind, that hides what was never hidden. The enlightened masters simply invite you, again and again with infinite patience, to rest, to stop, to discover directly that what you have been running desperately toward is actually what is hearing and understanding these words right now. Awareness itself is utterly unconditioned by experience, unborn from causes, unceasing through changes. You cannot improve it through practice. You cannot damage it through mistakes. You cannot lose it even if you try. Every authentic practice, every teaching, every meditation technique, all lead you eventually to that singular still point where the exhausting search finally ceases completely, and the silence, the spaciousness, the clarity that remains is recognized as the only nirvana there has ever been or ever will be. So remember and return to this teaching whenever the familiar impulse arises to chase after perfection or complete yourself spiritually through attainment. Smile gently at yourself and simply see that even that innocent-seeming impulse appears within awareness, floating like everything else. The awareness itself was never seeking, never bound, never lacking anything whatsoever. That's why the Buddha smiled radiantly under the Bodhi tree after his long night of final awakening. He realized nothing new whatsoever. He simply stopped seeking the old illusion he had been chasing. Enlightenment was not gained, acquired, or achieved. It was uncovered, revealed, recognized as what had always already been the case. You can experience this exact same timeless liberating truth right now in this very moment by simply noticing what is already aware of these words, already present before any thought arises. Nirvana is not the end of experience, sensation, perception, or life. It is the complete end of resistance to experience. It is the profound discovery that the so-called enlightened and the so-called unenlightened have shared the exact same awareness from the very beginning of beginningless time. When you finally stop trying to improve awareness or escape from its contents, you rediscover the profound stillness that was never disrupted or damaged by any experience whatsoever. Samsara melts into it effortlessly like morning frost melting under the warmth of sunrise. The sun of recognition has always been shining brilliantly. It was only our spiritual hurry, our anxious seeking, that kept the frost of confusion apparently solid and intact. And that is why the greatest Tibetan masters across all lineages and centuries keep repeating this uncomplicated, yet deeply unsettling message with unwavering consistency. Stop seeking. Stop now. Don't turn awakening into yet another possession, another item to add to your collection of achievements. Completely let go of every hope for nirvana, every fantasy of future enlightenment, and Nirvana instantly reveals itself as the very ground you have been standing on all along. The instant you truly stop, genuinely cease the search, the freedom that was never actually lost shines through everything like sunlight. That recognition, that simple seeing, is enlightenment itself. There is nothing more to find, nothing more to become, nowhere else to go. You are already home. Have you noticed in your own practice how seeking creates suffering? Have you experienced moments when you stopped trying and clarity appeared? Have you tasted the freedom that comes not from gaining something, but from recognizing what was never absent? Share your insights and experiences below because your understanding helps illuminate the path for others who are still caught in seeking. If this teaching resonates deeply in your heart, if it points you toward what you already know but have been forgetting, subscribe to this channel and activate notifications. We are building a community of practitioners who are willing to question even our most cherished spiritual assumptions and rest in the simple direct recognition of what is. Share this video with anyone you know who is exhausted from spiritual striving, anyone lost in endless seeking, anyone ready to stop and simply be. These ancient teachings have the power to liberate us from the prison of becoming and reveal the freedom of being. Thank you for your presence and attention. May all beings recognize their true nature. May all seeking cease. May all beings rest in the freedom that was never lost. May we all awaken together.